Hello, my name is Levon Affeyan, and we come to you today from Montreal, Canada. My guest today is a young Armenian professional that many of you may not have heard of yet. His name is Alexandre Meterissian. Welcome, Alex, to our program.
Thank you for having me, Levon.
Alex, you are hardly over 30 years old, yet you seem to have achieved tremendous success in the field of management consulting and corporate advisory. You were born in Montreal to an Armenian father, the very well-known surgeon Dr. Sarkis Meterissian, and the French-Canadian mother, Marcel Lavoie. You hold a bachelor's degree in political science from McGill University and a master's degree in business and strategy from HEC Montréal. You are a managing director at Teneo, where you are well known for having a deep understanding of public policy, communications, and corporate strategy. You have advised senior leadership of many high-profile organizations and helped them with their strategic policy issues as well as regulatory, financial, and business challenges. You have an impressive list of clients whom you have consulted. The number is too many to list, of course, but I thought it would be worthwhile to mention a few. Companies like Uber, Expedia Group, Coca-Cola, Alta Sciences, Rio Tinto, Shoppers Drug Mart, GlaxoSmithKline, etc. Prior to joining Teneo, you were a partner at Hatley Strategy Advisors, where you led the Government Affairs Group, advising both the Quebec provincial government and the Canadian federal government on policy issues. Upon graduating from university, you worked for Canada's Foreign Affairs and Immigration Ministers in Ottawa. As a proud Armenian Canadian, one of your passions is the economic development of the Republic of Armenia. You are currently the Canada representative for Enterprise Armenia, the national promotion authority of the country. You are also a member of the Business Angel Network of Armenia, which aims to help develop Armenia's strong high-tech startup ecosystem. You are a board member of the Build Up Bootcamp, which aims to build excellent engineers and provides top high-tech job opportunities. And all this, and you still seem to have found time to get married, and you are now the proud father of a beautiful little boy. So, Alex, as I mentioned before, you were born in Canada to an Armenian father and a French-Canadian mother. You attended the AGBU Alex Manoogian Elementary School, where you were taught a lot about Armenian language and culture. How did this experience at an Armenian school as a child of an immigrant affect your attitude and your vision on life?
Well, thank you, Levon, and thanks for that introduction. I loved attending Alex Manoogian, and through Alex Manoogian, I discovered all the great work that EGBU does. And most importantly, as someone who lives in Montreal, where there's only about 30,000 Armenians, it opened my mind to the Armenian world and the Armenian culture and where we came from. My parents, historically, my father came from Egypt, but how did they get to Egypt? And understanding that history was critical. Learning our ancient language, and also EGBU was very close to the Armenian diocese. So exploring our Christian heritage, but most importantly, the Christian values, which drive me today. And one of the reasons why I'm proud to have a young boy, and there's probably going to be more children on the way. And the school created that environment where, had I not attended that school, it would have been difficult to really, truly understand what being Armenian is, and also discovering our history and studying also Armenia, the Republic of Armenia, because as I was growing up, it was the beginning of our republic. So I learned about the republic through the school.
So I'd be curious to know, what does the term Armenian legacy mean to you?
The term Armenian legacy for me is a legacy of survival. We are one of the last ancient historical peoples of the Middle East. There's Assyrians and Jews left, and there's us. And that is unbelievable when you think about it. We have survived against all odds, and we've thrived. And very few peoples in the world have contributed so much to humanity. And so the way I look at the Armenian legacy is the preservation and the survival and the thriving of our people, not for the next 10 years, not for the next 20 years, but for the next 500 years, 1,000 years. And so we have a burden as Armenians, a positive burden to take the amazing heritage and history that we still own and have, and giving that back to humanity and preserving it for multiple generations to come. That's how I view the Armenian legacy.
As you're a young representative of the Armenian diaspora, you're the new generation. How would you describe the present day relationship between the Armenian diaspora, especially the Western diaspora, and Armenia itself?
Yeah, I would distinguish the Eastern diasporas from the Western diasporas. I think the Western diasporas, they've been in survival now for the last 50 or 70 years, for the last 2-3 generations. And so I think the diasporas are going to have to shift from being stateless. So for a very long time, for example, Alek Manukyan was founded in 1970. I mean, Armenia wasn't a country in 1970. But in 1991, it became one. That's still a full generation later. And so as a young Armenian, it's obvious to me that the future of the diaspora is interlinked directly with the Republic of Armenia. And so the Western diaspora is going to have to evolve from being a stateless people, where we've really focused on building and creating our own institutions and creating little, to taking those Armenians and directing them towards the growth and preservation of the Republic of Armenia. That's where I think the role of our diasporas in Canada, the United States, and France, and the UK, and Germany are going to have to, and Spain are going to have to pivot towards how do we support the Republic of Armenia moving forward, and how do we pivot our priorities as a community towards that.
Well, that's the subject that I wanted to continue on. Is in the last few years, it seems that the relationship between the diaspora and Armenia have changed, if that's a word we can use generally. Some will argue that is less than before. Some will argue that it's even a start of a better relationship. Many Armenians feel that the approaches, the old approaches of the diaspora do not work anymore. What do you think could or must or should or must be done on both sides to improve this relationship and be beneficial to Armenia?
Well, I think, I'm not going to both side this issue. I think it resides with the diaspora. The diaspora has to decide what its role is going to be and come to the Republic with clear solutions of what they are going to contribute to Armenia. Historically, the diaspora has been very inward-looking, very focused on ourselves, focused on our schools, our churches, and that's going to have to change. And so I know that over the last few years, there's been a lot of frustration from the diaspora, feeling that they're not heard by the Republic. But on the other side, the Republic doesn't really know what the diaspora actually wants. Does the diaspora want to move back to Armenia? Does the diaspora want to participate in the democratic process? Does the diaspora want seats in parliament? Does the diaspora want to participate in military service? Does the diaspora want to invest directly into Armenia? It's unclear what the diaspora wants. And so I think our institutions in the diaspora, whether it's AGBU or the ARF or other institutions, are going to have to look inside and say, what is our role going to be moving forward to support Armenia? It's not about building our communities anymore. Our communities are built. We've built the institutions. Building new buildings is not necessarily going to be the best thing for our diaspora moving forward. What the diaspora needs to decide is, how are we going to support Armenia? What do we want from the Republic? And then the Republic can create the institutions that are going to help us. Just having one diaspora commissioner, I think everyone agrees, is not the solution, but it's a first step. And so what else do we want? And what do we want to do in Armenia as Armenians? That's up to the diaspora to determine. It's not up, we can't wait for the Republic to get back to us. It's about us to say, we're going to do this. And we want the support of the institutions of the state to accomplish whatever the diaspora ends up doing.
That's an interesting approach. Certainly in my generation, the view was very different, and the diaspora is pretty much has kept that attitude. And it's nice to hear a different version from the younger generation. Now, switching a bit more to politics, you've been very successful as a political consultant, and you are in constant contact with many influential politicians here in Canada. Considering your professional expertise in public policy, how do you see your personal role in developing and improving these connections?
Absolutely. So, look, I'm very supportive of the state of Armenia. I do not care who's in government, but I will support the state, whether it's supporting our ambassador here in Canada, whether it's supporting Enterprise Armenia to attract investors to Armenia. I think I can contribute a lot there, whether it's helping the individual ministries with their strategic planning and connecting them with the right people in other countries that have the expertise, right? You know, the people who work in the state, in the republic, in Armenia, they need access to the top quality professionals. And that's something that the diaspora can contribute. We have unbelievably successful Armenians in the business world and also in the public policy world. And that expertise can be connected with and support the institutions. That's what I'm trying to do on an individual basis. But I think it's what others can also contribute. People in Armenia want the expertise. Armenia is a relatively small country, only 3 million people. They genuinely know that they don't have all the solutions. And so that's what I think I can contribute to support the state and its institutions, and making sure that ideas that seem crazy today, if we support them and bring the professionalism and the expertise, it'll be enough to develop and deploy a lot of these aspirations and these strategies moving forward. That's what I want to contribute.
Some people may say that the Armenian government today has not reached out to the diaspora, yet I know for a fact that they've been in contact with you and you've been able to help them tremendously. Why do you think that you've been successful in dealing with the Armenian government?
Because, frankly, it's not about, and I'm going to get back to my core concept, it's not about waiting for the Republic to come with solutions to us. We have to support them. And we have to be humble, right? We can't look from our Western perspective what's going on in an Eastern environment. And we have to be also humble. And, you know, Canada, the GDP per capita is 50,000. In Armenia, it's 4,000 or 5,000. So Canada is 10 times wealthier than Armenia on an individual basis. We can't bring our wealthy, democratic, Western perspective and think that we know it all. And you know, it's a problem not just for our community. It's a problem for other diasporas as well, by the way. It's not unique to Armenians. So I think I've come to the table saying, giving perspective, being humble and realizing I don't know everything. I don't speak very good Armenian, and I'm very transparent about that. And I think if you come with a humble perspective and you say, look, I have an idea and I'd like to deploy it and I'd like to work with the different teams, but ultimately it's not your decision as a diasporan, right? It's the state institutions that have to make the decision. All you're doing is helping them, guiding them to the right end. And that's, I think, how so far I've been successful. And the other thing that people need to understand in the diaspora is if you're going to do significant change, like I'm talking about change that has a certain scale and that's significant, you don't do that in 1 month or even 6 months. It takes years. And I've told you this privately. I'm dedicated to the Republic for the next 10 years. I'm taking a 10-year perspective on various projects that I'm working with. And sure, it's nerve-wracking to see the headlines, but real significant change is going to take time and it's going to take effort. And so for those who are looking for quick fixes, quick changes, unfortunately, that's not how things work. And the last thing I'll mention, and I'll stop on that, is, you know, historically, the diaspora was very happy buying cows, individual cows for farmers. You know, that's great and it's very helpful, but it won't bring about significant change. So it gives you that quick fix because you bought a cow and 2 weeks later the farmer had it and you were happy. But that's not my perspective. That's not a lot of how people see it in government. That's not government's work in general. And so you got to realize that big change is going to take a lot of time and be patient.
Interesting. You've been working for the last few years with economic development. In your opinion, what are the biggest strengths of Armenia?
Oh my God, there's so many. So this is actually not an Enterprise Armenia pitch. This is my own personal perspective. Armenia has an amazing banking system. It is actually impressive. I have my own bank accounts. I use Emiria Bank, but there's tons of other great banks in Armenia. So for an Eastern economy, that's very surprising and impressive. First thing. Second thing, we complain about Armenia's location, but the reality is Armenia is perfectly located geographically to all the major markets, whether it's the EU, Russia, China, India, the Middle East. It's very, very well positioned. And the biggest strength of Armenia, and this very few people talk about, the biggest strength, it's the only place in the world that if you start a technology company, and I personally invest in startups, as you know, Levon, it's the only place in the world where an Iranian, an American, a French, a Chinese, a Russian, a Saudi, or a Qatari can all work together on the same company. It's the only place in the world where they can all meet without having crazy visas and being blocked. It's the only place in the world. Armenia is uniquely positioned to be a beacon of freedom and economic prosperity in a sea of dictatorships and dysfunctional democracies. And it doesn't matter if Armenia is a small country. Armenia is the same size as Switzerland, and look how powerful Switzerland is. Singapore is a fraction the size of Armenia. Look how powerful Singapore is. Look at Qatar. Sure, Qatar is natural gas. But look how tiny Qatar is. Qatar is only a third of Armenia's size geographically. But look how powerful Qatar is in the world. So people need to stop looking at Armenia on the map and saying, look how small and irrelevant it is. On the contrary, Armenia has strong institutions, strong banking system, a decent currency for a small country, and an unbelievable ability to rally people from all sorts of different backgrounds to work in a common perspective. And obviously, all of these factors are contributing to the technology sector. Armenia has strong engineering and STEM research. And that research now is paying dividends because now we have the big tech companies, Armenian tech companies, and diaspora and tech companies are moving to Armenia, like Service Titan. So I think Armenia is well positioned for the next decade, if not 2 decades, in that part of the world, but also globally, to be a true leader, whether it's in financial services, like Henry Arslanian, another diasporan, who's moving a lot of his blockchain companies to Armenia and very successful doing that. So look, I'm very bullish on Armenia economically, independently of what and actually GDP numbers just came out for Armenia today. Armenia has unbelievably surpassed GDP expectations even as the world enters recession. So I'm very bullish, Levon, and as you know, I'm very passionate about Armenia's economic development. So
I feel that in your voice, Alex, but it wouldn't be fair if I also didn't ask you what you feel are the biggest challenges of Armenia.
Yeah, look, the biggest challenge, I've said it for a very long time, actually, the biggest challenge of Armenia is national security. And so we're seeing that today. The world, the tectonic plates are shifting for Armenia, and I think in its favor. We saw it this week with the defense deal with India, which is a significant deal. We saw also this week that the government of Armenia is raising its budget for its next fiscal budget to $1.4 billion in national defense, becoming the #1 priority of the country, of the state. And even the U.S., for the first time in modern history, has said that they are going to possibly directly to Armenia, in the context where the United States just lifted its arms export ban to Cyprus, which is a good sign for Armenia. And so as Armenia shifts hopefully away from being dependent only on Russia, and I'm not against Russia, just to be clear, I have issues obviously like everyone else with what we're seeing in the news, but Armenia as a country, as a small nation, has to be careful. And so you can't just alienate one player. We need to have as many friends as we can with 2 very powerful enemies around us. We have no choice. So I think that's the #1 challenge. We have to be very honest about it. And we have to be very transparent about it. But in spite of that, Armenia is still succeeding, which is unbelievable. And it says a lot about our people.
So as a last question, what can Canada and other countries with major Armenian diasporas do for Armenia now, as the country suffers from yet another attack from Azerbaijan?
Look, it's a great question. So for a long time, Armenia is the only G7 country that doesn't have an embassy in Armenia. So that was resolved a few months ago when the federal government finally announced that they're going to open a permanent embassy in Yerevan specifically. So that would have been my answer had they not done that. That being said, I think Canada is limited in what it can do geopolitically. I mean, Canada is not a significant player globally. We often piggyback on our allies. So let's see what France and the United States end up doing, and Canada will probably follow that. In the interim, I think one thing that's critical that Canada could do is sanction Azerbaijan. It's time to sanction them. So we'll see what our allies or the Canadian allies do. But frankly, I think where Canada can play a positive role is around economic development. It would be great to have a large delegation of Canadian politicians with large Canadian businesses, especially our technology companies here in Canada, to visit Armenia. I think that would be extremely helpful. And it would open up the eyes and ears of Canadian business to all the possibility that Armenia offers to access the entire Middle East, to access all the CIS countries, to access India and China. I think it would open the eyes to Canadian business. So I think that's something tactically that Canada could do. But look, frankly, I'm going to be very honest, and privately government officials would probably say the same thing, is Canada's limited what they can do for Armenia. So we have to be honest about it with ourselves.
Well, Alex, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I love your optimism for Armenia, and I wish that many younger generation Armenians, professionals like yourselves, have that attitude. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you soon.
My pleasure, Levon. See you soon.